Welcome to Momentum Magnet, a podcast to inspire your growth. I'm Karen Morales, and your host in helping you find ways to make positive changes for your business, health, relationships, and life. We always have a path to a happier ending, so let's get started today. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Momentum Magnet. We're excited to have you here this Friday afternoon for a conversation on life's detours. All of us have had a moment in time where something didn't go as planned in our life and often our business. And today we're going to talk about how some of those outcomes can help you get to the next level of growth in your next endeavor. Today we're talking to Brian Greenfield, president of the Purple Carrot, a fast-growing vegan food company. Today he's going to share the story of his first startup, a $100 million business that ended up not making it, and how he was able to apply those lessons to his existing business. We're going to talk about how his career trajectory from investment banking and private equity ended him up in startups, and how a clerical error actually stopped him from pursuing a career in the clandestine CIA. So after today's episode, you will hear some of the best tips to be a successful startup leader, and how some of the mindset hacks of the athlete in all of us can be applied to our business successes. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian, who's here to talk to the audience today. Hey, Brian.
Hi, Karen. So awesome to be with you.
Great. Well, the first place I wanted to start, let's start positively. It's, the Friday before Labor Day weekend. It's been about 6 months of this global pandemic. And we've heard a lot of stories in the news about people struggling with their businesses. As the president of Purple Carrot, can you talk a little bit about how the vegan food movement is actually growing right now and what your impact has been during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. COVID has been wild for all of us. But what started in March, I think for most of America, actually turned into a crazy spike in demand and in business for us. We, right around the time when the lockdown was happening in late March and early April, we saw people just trying to figure out, where are we going to get our food? How are we going to get our food? We're scared of the supermarkets. We're not going to restaurants. And the interest in meal kits at that time just saw, if you looked at a Google Trends chart, which is something we like to do, you would see that just completely off the chart. And it wasn't just for our business. It was for all things grocery delivery, Instacart, DoorDash, Uber Eats, those types of companies. But so right around when that happened, we saw almost a doubling of our business. And we'll end up seeing for the full year 2020, we'll be up about 100% compared to where we were last year.
Okay. So we've anchored the story, and you are the successful president of a growing business during a global pandemic. That's amazing. So talk to us a little bit about how you got there in your journey to grow this meal business and how you inevitably were able to sell it to a global company.
Sure. So, and maybe we'll talk a little bit later about the startup that I was at before joining Purple Carrot. But when I joined Purple Carrot, it was January of 2016. And I joined actually a friend of mine. So the founder is a guy named Andy Levitt, who we had known each other socially. We have children the same age, and we had met casually at a backyard barbecue and remained friends. And
that's an important point, that you can actually do a business deal at a backyard barbecue.
Exactly. And a big question about, is it smart to get into business with friends? I think you could do a whole podcast on that one. And Andy and I really were thoughtful about that. And so when I joined him, we joined as I was a consultant. I was going to work with him together for about 4 or 5 months. We'll see how it went. Part of the goal was to see what of the sort of near-term goals that Andy and I had together for the business we'd be able to accomplish in that first half of the year. And we can talk about some of those. But then really it was about, how are we going to work together? We're friends. We have very different sort of roles within the company. And I think that's something that's important when you look for founding partners. How do you complement each other? But it's worked great. We've had a wonderful experience. We've had ups and downs as a business and mostly positive stuff, but it's just super important that whoever your partner is and whoever your ultimate leadership and full team is, that you have open communication and are able to work through those what can be challenging times.
And that's interesting because you share a commonality with about 95% of the CEOs in the country for Fortune 500s, right? According to Fortune, which was you played college athletics. And when you look at that trend, they say there is a red thread, right, that goes through the experience of college athletes and leaders in business. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience as a college athlete and even as an adult athlete has brought to your business expertise?
Yeah, adult athlete. I'm still out there hacking around on the soccer field. Actually, just this morning was helping a friend of mine who is the head soccer coach at a local private school, helping them with preseason and getting chased around the field by 17 and 18-year-olds. So trying to stay fit and having fun. But sure, yeah, when I think about the lessons that I've learned in life as much as in business, so many of them come back to playing competitive sports at all levels. And, it's about what does it take to strive for a team goal? What does it mean to be a successful member of a team? How do you have your teammates' backs when things are against the wall, when things aren't always going well? How do you rally back from a loss, right? How do you behave when you have a big win? Just so many of those things. And I think people's sort of true character comes out in a competitive landscape. And so, I know just from the guys that I've played with, I could say that's the type of person who I know nothing about them intellectually. Maybe I know nothing about their career, but I could guarantee that that's the type of person that I would want in any business that I'm working in, because it's really where your character can start to be built and can shine through.
And that might be one of the reasons why it was easier for you to go into business with a friend, because you were used to having those symbiotic on and off the field relationships with people who were close to you, but you could turn it on and be teammates with a focused goal when you needed to be. That's an important distinction, right? So what do you think makes a relationship in a business with a friend successful? You said open communication.
I will come back to communication. I think in life and in business, that's the number one most important thing in almost any aspect of it. And so, whether it's Andy, CEO of Purple Carrot, or the prior company that I co-founded and we'll get into, was also with a college classmate of mine. So somebody who I've known for 20 years, had at the time known for 20 years. And we would pick up the phone and we would call each other. Even our spouses were friends. And so we would say, personal call, this is a personal call. We're not talking business. And we'd talk about, plans for the weekend. And, 95% of the time we were talking to each other, they were business calls. But I think it's like in any relationship, it's about being open and direct and candid and giving feedback real time in the moment, not letting stuff fester or build up over time, and aligning on what are your goals, right? What are your goals for personal goals? What are your goals for the business? And how are we doing against those goals? And what do we need to be doing to align with them if we're not aligned? So I think it's really about sussing out if there ever is any misalignment, and going hard at that, right? Talking about it. Don't bury it. Because anything you bury is just going to come back and bite you later on.
And talking about it is something that you have done very openly with people in your network. You are known to send your Bible of mistakes from your first failed startup to anyone that asks. So let's talk a little bit about that first startup experience with Next Step Living. It was a $100 million company. It was once rated the fastest growing company in the state of Massachusetts, and yet it's not here today. And you're very open about talking about the lessons learned. So let's go back to that time and period and talk about what that business was and what you learned in that process.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So Next Step Living, we founded it in 2008 at exactly, turned out to be a good time to start a business, but a very scary time. It was right when the financial crisis was happening. And I co-founded it with a friend from Williams. And he liked to tell the story. We were on the plane coming back from the West Coast, from San Francisco to Boston. We were starting it. And the front page of the Wall Street Journal that day said, "Economy to entrepreneurs turn back." Like, horrible time to be thinking about starting a business. And yet I was moving back to the West Coast with my wife, who was 7 months pregnant, with our first child and our only son it was a scary time to be starting a business, but it was something that I just had always wanted to go for and had made the decision that I was going to make a leap from what I'd been doing previously in my career. So Next Step Living is a residential energy service business. So what we did was we went into people's homes. It was a service. We sent energy auditors into homes. We'd spend about an hour there. We'd analyze the homes and we'd make recommendations for what are things that you can do to make your home more energy efficient. Some are obvious, like maybe replacing with energy efficient light bulbs, upgrade the insulation, but then we'd make recommendations about heating and cooling systems or installing solar or other renewable power. And so when the business started, we were really just doing the energy audits. And the idea was, can we take this to scale? Can we be that sort of trusted source for all of the energy upgrades that people might want to do to their home? And I'd like to sort of frame the whole business was around the mission of both helping people save money. At the time, there was a financial crisis happening, so it was a great time to be saving money, but also how do you lower your carbon footprint and have a positive impact on the environment? And that mission was so core to everything that we did there. So the business grew really rapidly. We did about $1 million that first year, and then it went to 10 to 30 to 60 to 100.
5 years, you went from
5 years from 1 to 100. And we went from a small founding team of 4 of us to about 900 employees. And so, incredible, really rocket ship type growth. But with that came a lot of challenges. And I'd say the biggest challenges were that it was really, really hard to make the business profitable. In fact, we never were able to make it profitable. And that wasn't a problem in the early days. And we were raising money and we had investors who were excited for the growth. And sort of that was the focus for the early years of, we'll figure out how to get profitable. We were the largest residential energy efficiency business actually in the country at the time. And the idea was, we'll figure out how to get profitable, but let's really go for market share and let's grow and let's be the first to scale in this category. And that's a fine approach, but you have to be really careful about how much cash you're using along the way and how much cash it's going to take to be successful. And I think we reached a point where we needed to pivot. We needed to stop raising cash and stop going just for revenue and trying to be actually profitable. And some of our investors really wanted that shift to happen very, very quickly, sort of to the point of, we're not putting any more money in now. In the next 12 months, you've got to be profitable. And perfectly good and legit goal for a business to be profitable. But that was like turning a sort of cruise ship, around in too tight an area. And so we made a lot of changes. We restructured the business several times, and we got very, very close to being profitable, but couldn't quite make it there in time. And ultimately what ended up happening is the investors sort of lost an interest in funding it, and we had to shut the business down. It was very sad, and I could talk about the learnings forever, but I'm also super proud of what we did there, and especially how the team stayed together, and how the mission really helped keep everybody just excited and focused during all those rocket ship years, but even tight during the times where it was getting more evident that it was going to be hard to make it work out.
Wow, so many questions I have after that story. But one of the things that came up for me was, how do you think this access to capital can hurt a business in thinking strategically about their growth and their profitability?
That's such a great question. I think and it might seem somewhat counterintuitive, but often entrepreneurs feel like, when I'm raising money, I want to get the highest possible valuation for my business, right? And because that means that whatever amount of money you're raising, you're giving up a relatively smaller percent of the business. So let's go for the biggest possible valuation. But what happens when you raise money striving for the highest possible valuation is those investors, in order for them to make a return, you need to sell the company down the road at an even higher, of course, valuation. And that might mean, it needs to be multiples of that valuation. So pick any number, whatever it is, in order for the investor to get their return, you might need to sell for 3 or 4 or 5 times that original valuation. And then in order to do that, that might mean, well, then you really need to grow at this very fast rate in order to justify a potential for that future valuation. And that might then influence what strategic decisions are right for the business. So I think what we fell into the trap of, and I've seen this happen in a lot of businesses, including the meal kit industry that I'm in now, when companies really go for revenue growth at the expense of profit, you really better hope that there's a potential to reach some sort of exit or liquidity event or something that's going to get those investors a return. Because when that doesn't happen, you could find real misalignment in your investors, people who are potentially underwater financially. The valuation is below where they invested or close to where they invested. And that starts to drive other uncomfortable decisions that need to be made at companies.
That's really interesting. So if you were to say, you're sitting next to a founder right now who's struggling with their business, what would you say is the number one financial marker they should be looking at on a daily or weekly basis?
Great question. Again, I really focus on just unit economics, right? And that's a broad term, but what does unit economics mean? It's different for every single business. For us in the meal kit, that it's just a straightforward formula, right? What is the amount that we sell our weekly box for, and what are the costs that go into that, right? So that's sort of like the gross margin, the profit of that box. And what I want to know is, what's the lifetime value of an average customer going to be? So I take the profit of that box times the number of times that they're going to order over their lifetime with us. That's a very important metric. And what I want to know is, how much is it costing me to acquire those customers on average? And am I getting a return for that? So as long as I'm getting let's say 2 or 3 times return, and that's specific to the meal kit industry, every industry is different. If I'm getting a multiple of my cost to acquire a customer, that means the unit economics are working, and at a point where you should consider scaling the business. And maybe you should consider raising money or just growing at a rate, because in that example, lifetime value over customer acquisition cost ratio, if that's 3-to-1 in my industry, that's good. What sometimes companies do, and this is what actually happened in past companies I've been at, is you start to scale before you truly understand that formula. And so at my last business, it was really, the economics were not great, right? The margin that we were making on putting insulation into people's homes was pretty low. And on some of the other energy efficiency projects was pretty low. Yet it costs a lot in overhead and management to facilitate these many small, complex projects. And so it was really hard to make the business work at a small scale. Yet we were trying to figure out how to improve the economics while also trying to grow. And that's a challenging thing to do. So I'd say, long-winded way of saying, nail the unit economics of your business before you start to grow. And it's okay to say, I'm not at the best possible unit economics. I know I could improve my margin. If you have a real clear path to how you're going to do that over time, that's perfectly great and might make sense to raise money and to be growing at that point. But don't try to grow until you've nailed your unit economics, for sure.
I mean, I would say I use that in marketing all the time. I never have used the term unit economics. Maybe I should. I can probably charge more if I say unit economics. But I usually tell founders, do not start a second product until you can sell the first one in a scalable, repeatable system.
Exactly.
And also, I think a lot of startups will come to me and say, I need a huge media campaign. And yet when you dig deep about the consumer drivers, why people want to buy the thing or the service, they aren't clear. Mm-hmm. So I said, until you can answer those questions and know exactly why someone is interested in buying this and what is the right price point to sell it at, shouldn't be wasting a ton of money in advertising. Advertising is a scaling technique, in my opinion. It's not necessarily your first to market approach.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about is another way of saying product market fit, right? And make sure that you've got the right product for the right market and you understand your customers clearly enough and why they're buying what you're selling before you start to try to scale.
That's great. So I've had the benefit of seeing the Brian Greenfield list of lessons learned from successful startup culture. And I loved it because it felt like it was a really deep look across multiple facets of the business. You've touched on some of the financial pillars. You've touched on some of the product necessities, which is really understanding the drivers and the economics. But one of the most important thing that I think clients overlook a lot is the people capital. And one of the things you wrote down that I've seen in many businesses and even in my own is that your weakest link will provide your most amount of problems. So there's even an HBR article, I'll probably misquote it, but it's this idea that if you leave a B player on your team or a C player on your team, that is worse than, trying to blanket them with a bunch of high performers. You need to make sure that you're moving everybody up the food chain to higher performance. So let's talk a little bit about how you've instilled that sort of contribution mindset at the Purple Carrot.
Yeah, I mean, first, I just agree totally with that statement. Not just because it was on my list, but I've seen it on so many lists as well. Carrying a person who is not a performer has so many negative consequences. And it's perfectly reasonable to take someone who's not a performer and create a path and provide the resources and the support and hope that they can ultimately get there to be a real contributing member. But after you've done that and you've come to a conclusion that this person is just not right for various reasons for our organization, you have to make a change. And that might mean put them into a different role if there is a role that they can be successful at, or it might mean how do we help you go find a job at another company where you can be more successful, and you might just have to let somebody go because it's reached a point and you've given them enough feedback and it's just they're not able to get there. So that's absolutely just critical that you do that. In terms of the question about how we seek out talent and how do we make sure that we're hiring and retaining the right people, what we've really evolved to at Purple Carrot is competency-based hiring. So we have a set of core competencies within the business that are things like team player, right? Problem solution mindset.
Almost
right?
Values, cultural values.
They're cultural values, but we bring it to the level of how do we expect people at every level within the organization to exhibit those values. And so everyone should display teamwork, but what does it mean if you're an entry-level person versus if you're a C-suite person? Or everyone should show initiative, right? What does it mean to show initiative as a super junior person versus someone who's got a whole team and is leading a whole group?
Actually customize those attributes to all of your job positions?
We do.
Wow.
We do. And we interview for that. So then when we're interviewing, we have a team of people interviewing a candidate and we divide out who is interviewing for each competency. And we have sort of a question bank that we ask. So we make sure we ask similar types of questions so we can fairly compare candidates across a range of positions and a range of interviews. And those are all the sort of, I'll call them softer, their values and their competencies. That's in addition to all the hard skills needed for whatever the job is that we're hiring for, which there are obviously different ways to test for.
That's amazing. And has that helped you? So you were acquired last year. Is that the right timing? Right.
Yep. In May of 19.
Company. So can you talk a little bit about that process to take this company through the acquisition process and how it's been to work culturally with a parent company from another country?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we thought about growing Purple Carrot, one of the main original goals was and it goes back to your question about investors and capital raising. Our approach was, let's raise not anywhere near the amount of money that other big meal kits have raised, right? Blue Apron, they're public now, and their stock price is now below 10% of where they were when they went public. And they had raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Many other companies out there had raised hundreds of millions of dollars. We raised about $15 million total over the years, which is not a small amount, but compared to other meal kits, it's a relatively small amount. And the reason that we did that is because our vision was, how are we going to take Purple Carrot, which is a niche product within that category, plant-based food, but we framed it as vegan food for non-vegans. So yes, we're vegan, but we're looking to offer our solutions to anybody who's just trying to be healthier and maybe eat a little bit more.
And then be taken and be welcome in your brand.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. On the side.
tempeh bacon or something like that. Yeah, exactly. And so we always knew that what we wanted to do was focus on what we believe we could be really good at, which is create delicious plant-based meals that are accessible to everybody. We have an awesome head chef and an awesome culinary team, and they're fantastic. And we also wanted to focus on the customer experience. What's it like to be part of the plant-based movement as part of being a member of the Purple Carrot community? That's where we wanted to focus. We didn't want to focus on building out our own infrastructure and having our own distribution centers and things that are very capital intensive, where we couldn't differentiate ourselves and be the best in the industry. So we always knew, let's focus on what we're good at, and then we're going to find a strategic partner or an acquirer ultimately whose brand we fit in well with, and maybe who has broader access to resources than we might, who could help us then scale. So we conducted a process to look for potential acquirers out there, and we found one. We had not anticipated that we would find one outside of the US, but we were incredibly excited to be acquired by a company based in Tokyo, in Japan. They're an e-commerce food business, and they've been doing it for 20 years. And they also have a division of their company that does meal kits. And so incredible, even though it's on the other side of the world and with a different...
Interesting, though. Are meal kits a global phenomenon? Are they across the world now?
They are across the world now. Yeah. Yeah. They actually started in Europe. I think they originated in Sweden even before they were in the States in 2013 and 14 is when they came to the States.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Okay, yeah. So the Japanese company decides to buy you out. And what is kind of veganism like in Japan?
It's not a thing. It's not a thing. But what they were interested in is they see US food trends often as being about 10 years ahead of Japanese food trends. And so they see the plant-based movement, which is happening here, which is really accelerating, I'd say. And they want to be on the cutting edge of that. So they saw Purple Carrot as having a strong brand within the plant-based world in the US. And they wanted to take us to Japan and use our brand as the way to introduce plant-based eating into their customer base, and ultimately beyond their existing customer bases, which is where we'll go over time.
So how are they experiencing the same growth in the Japanese market during COVID? They are.
Absolutely. It's so incredible to see at exactly the same time. I mean, I think the growth comes, if you look, we all know those charts that we've been seeing about cases globally and infections and all of that. But the growth in our business and the growth in their business mirrors those charts in the US and in Japan. So right when Japan started to increase, which was a little bit before the US was, so it was a little earlier March in terms of cases, that was when their business really spiked. And they've seen Japan has handled the pandemic much better than the US has, and cases are much lower relative to population. But they still saw a very massive spike in their business, very similar to what we saw.
And are people adopting the vegan way of life and cooking? How has that been received? And does that take a lot of effort for them to sort of train people on tempeh? And I guess tofu would be more common in the Japanese market already.
Right. Tofu is more common. The way they do it is so think about their services like an Amazon Fresh or an Instacart. So you can order all of your groceries delivered directly from them. And as part of that, you can order meal kits thrown into your groceries if you want. And so they might have on any given week 30 different meals that you can add. And
why can't we do that here? That sounds even better. Put it with my grocery order. I love that idea.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Okay,
I like that. Okay, that's good. So they can drop it into their regular grocery order. They can pick their meal kits.
Yep.
It gets shipped to their house.
Exactly. And so a subset of those 30 meals that they offer each week will be Purple Carrot branded plant-based meals. And they're not promoting it as vegan for the sake of being vegan or plant-based for health benefits. These are delicious plant-based meals branded under the Purple Carrot look and feel, which has been really cool to see our brand in Tokyo. And it's been received very, very well.
Do they use the same recipes that we do here, or are they having a different chef put a little?
We try to. We sort of start with the same base, and then because of maybe constraints around sourcing particular ingredients or other sort of local tastes and preferences, we customize them a little bit, but we do start generally with the same types of meals.
That's really neat. I love that. So when you think about Next Step Living and the Purple Carrot, both had a real underpinning of values, right? Contribution to the world.
Yep.
And that's been kind of a theme that has trickled through your career. So if we go back now a few steps, the first place you started after college was, the traditional finance path. You worked at Morgan Stanley, you worked at Parthenon. Can you talk a little bit about leaving Williams, leaving your career as, a soccer athlete who actually won the national championship, and then how you got into banking and then eventually thought, this isn't for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Williams College, loved it, played soccer there, studied economics, which it's a liberal arts school, which basically means you're supposed to learn how to learn, and you're supposed to be able to be, well-versed in lots of subjects, but you don't really come out with very tangible, hard skills. That's not the goal of a liberal arts education. And so when I was coming out, I was I'm interested in business. I don't know ultimately what I'm going to want to do in business, but I want to start to gain some real kind of hard skills. And so I joined Morgan Stanley as in the investment banking financial analyst program. So that's a 2-year program where you work your butt off. If I was home before midnight on any night, that was an early night. And it was close to 7 days a week. I mean, you really, you have not much of a social life, but that's okay because it's your first roll out of college. You get worked hard, but you learn a lot. And so I learned about how businesses think about raising money, whether they're thinking how they think about going public. Is it debt? Is it equity? And what are other sort of strategic ways they think about mergers and acquisitions? And then from the hard skill side, it was learning about the financial statements and how the income statement works and how the cash flow statement and the balance sheet and how they all interact with each other. And so anytime you're thinking about growing a business or projecting the growth of that business, you need to project for each one of those how they interact and how they're gonna grow together. So that was what I was looking for there, and I got that. But I also knew investment banking was not right for me. I think I knew that before I joined. But when, maybe another career tip, it's probably obvious, but anytime you're in a place and you can look at the leadership team there, and not to say anything disparaging about the specific leadership team, but if you look to the leaders or the senior people there and think, I don't aspire to have that role or their life, then you might be in a wrong place. And so that was my sense there. I just knew that wasn't for me. And so I moved on from Morgan Stanley to Parthenon Capital, which is a private equity firm where we invest in middle market companies. So it's actually investing, not just advising on transactions. It's putting private equity dollars into companies, and then it's helping those companies grow. And ultimately, it's about selling those companies for a return for your investors. But what excited me was not just the investing part, but the helping the businesses grow. It was really starting to get into the operations of it and the marketing of it, and what is it going to take to scale businesses. But I also realized I had never done it myself. And as much as I had been to school and understand the frameworks for how businesses think about growth and different strategic initiatives, I had personally within myself, I had no credibility. And I'm meeting with CEOs as a pre-business school, fairly junior person. And my role is to give them advice and guidance on things they can be doing with their business. And I felt a bit like a fraud, to be honest. And it was uncomfortable from that perspective. I thought, if I were one of these people who was running a company, I wouldn't want to hear from me about what I should be doing. And that was really what made me think, all right, I'm going to go build a business, right? And so why don't I go back to school? I'll look for a mission-driven business or something that I can be super passionate about, and I'll start growing businesses after business school.
So you left New York City, came back to the Boston area. You went to Sloan and MIT for business school.
Yeah.
You had a career shift, and one that we've discussed before this episode that we can talk about. So talk to us about how you ended up at business school and you were chasing the dream of being an entrepreneur. Yeah. And pretty soon thereafter, you were looking at something totally different.
Yeah. So it was my first semester of business school. Business school is 2 years. So it was my first semester of business school. And in the fall of that semester, I was invited to be the best man at my college roommate's wedding. And so I was best man at his wedding. And then a couple of weeks later, we were together at another one of our mutual friends' weddings. And my friend came up to me and he said, "You know my parents, right?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. I know your parents. I've known them since, freshman year of college." And he said, "I've told you what they do, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've known. We've never really been that explicit about it, but we've talked a little bit about it." And, it turned out that his parents had spent 30 years in the senior leadership of the CIA. And they had said to him, "Brian, with his business background, and we saw the way, he just sort of acted around you and around our guests at your wedding, we'd love to talk to him about potentially having a career in the CIA."
So your spy skills were game on at the wedding. That's impressive.
I don't even know what he was referring to, but something like that.
They saw something in you. Okay.
Yeah.
So talk to us about this, because I don't think anybody has probably ever spoken to someone who went down that path of trying to enter the Central Intelligence Agency. Was that like?
It was what? So my friend tells me, "You should talk to my parents." And I said, "Absolutely, let's do that." I, was obviously honored that they thought that. And so I went and I met with his folks. They had a house on the Cape, which is Cape Cod near us. I drove down there and just sat in their living room and learned about the life and learned about what it is that they were referring to and the different branches. And there's the clandestine service, and are you on the official cover or non-official cover? And specifically, I would have been on non-official cover, which means living generally abroad, working for ostensibly a business that might be a multinational, it might be a US business. Nobody knows who you actually work for, but you're doing your day job working for that business, and your night job is working for the CIA.
So they're legitimately grooming you to be a global spy. That happened to you.
They recruited me.
So you're recruited to be a clandestine global part of the CIA under deep cover. I'm using the fun words that a lot of us know from the movies.
Yeah.
What happens next? You think?
Well, so, I mean, right. And it's easy to say they recruited me. You had one conversation, what does that really mean? But it went forward for there. So I ultimately applied. And there's a whole process to apply, and it's a written application, and then you have a phone call, and then you have in-person interviews. And it was about a year worth of interviews at multiple places around the country. At one point, as things got more and more advanced, and I was sort of passing the early screening rounds, I would get an envelope in the mail from an unmarked location with a kind of an X on a map that says, go to this place for your interview. And I'd go to a building that you would never know is really a CIA building. And you go in there for a full day worth of interviews, multiple days worth of interviews.
And what does a CIA interview look like? What happens in those interviews? If you talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it. I will see if I get a phone call from somebody tomorrow. Depending on your viewership of this podcast, I might get in some trouble. But no, I don't think anything here is confidential. A range, right? The interviews there's aspects of it that are like what we were talking about before, of competencies and strengths and weaknesses and just sort of standard business type questions. But then we get into a little bit of role play and scenarios. So you're acting with your interviewer. We're in a cafe in Mexico, and you're trying to recruit a particular individual to be an agent to spy on behalf of the US, and someone else who knows you from another country or another part of the world comes up and introduces themselves to the table, but they're calling you by a different name than you've introduced yourself to the person who you're sitting with at, and go. And you're like role playing, trying to, act smooth and navigate through a situation like that. That was one example. Lots of questions about current events across the globe. So picking sort of random countries where there might be things happening that would be publicly available information, maybe in the New York Times or that sort of stuff. But they would pick random countries and say, tell me what's going on in Georgia right now, like the country Georgia. And there happened to be stuff going on in the country of Georgia that I had learned about. Language skills. This was a super interesting part to me, that you had to be tested on your language skills, but not of a specific language. So they actually have a made up language where you get some time to learn the grammar rules and other sort of attributes of that language. Then you listen to different phrases, and you have to maybe put the sentences in the right grammatical order, or sort of learn a little bit of vocabulary. And this is complete gibberish, right? It's a made up language, but it's testing your ability to understand and pick up languages. Those were some of the more interesting parts of the interview process.
I mean, this makes the management consulting case interviews look like, a walk in the park, like a day in kindergarten. So you make it through this process, right? And you have passed these levels. You passed the language test. I think, if I remember correctly, you actually got the highest score possible on this gibberish language, which is mind-blowing to people listening, I think. What do you attribute that to? You just have a skill?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't speak many languages. I'm decent with Spanish, and I enjoy trying to pick up, other languages if I'm traveling there just for fun. But yeah, what they said, this language that I learned was sort of the equivalent of learning Chinese or Russian or Arabic, which are sort of considered three of the hardest languages to learn.
Wow. So you get through this process, and what happens? Do you actually get an offer from the CIA?
I did. So you get it's called a conditional offer for employment. And it comes in the mail. It's a letter, but with a full package of what the comp is and the benefits are and all this sort of stuff that you would expect from any normal job offer. But it also came with a whole background check application. And so I had a couple weeks to decide, am I going to accept this offer? And if so, they're going to begin an extensive background check. So this was now over a year had gone by. So it was the fall of 2004, my second year of business school. And I thought long and hard about it. And I was excited for the mission. This was in the years sort of early after 9/11, when the US intelligence community was really trying to rebuild itself. And I was just excited to do something and be part of something bigger than myself. And so I accepted it, which was hard to do, but I accepted it.
You accepted it. And then, so I guess the question everybody's wondering is, did you actually live in a foreign country, and were you a practicing CIA agent?
I was not, because what accepted it means is I accepted it. Now they had to begin their background check. And their background check was extensive. And they were talking to people from all aspects of my life. But also it involved flying back down and having multiple days of polygraph exams and physical exams, eye exams, heart exams, other stuff like that. And so I had gone through that. And then about a month later, I opened my mail and had a very thin envelope with one piece of paper in it. And it said, "Thank you for your interest, and thank you for applying and accepting the conditional offer. However, unfortunately, due to information that's come out during your background process, we have to rescind the conditional offer for employment." And that was it. That was it.
No context, no explanation, no details. So at this point, you're almost at the end of business school. This whole time you're thinking you're going into the CIA, you're ready to move overseas, you feel driven by the mission, and all of a sudden, break, stop, no explanation. It's like you got left at the altar, gone.
Yeah.
You know what's happening. So how do you feel? How do you recover from something like that?
It sucked. It was brutal. It was really brutal. I've not gotten jobs before, and this was different than that for me. I had really gotten into the headspace. One, I was just, as the more and more that I went through the interview process, the more excited I got about it and committed to it, but also committed to it emotionally. And I was envisioning myself in that world, but also conducting, my personal relationships in a way that I might have handled a little bit differently had I might have taken more advantage of business school, let's say, had I not thought that I was going to be going that route. And it was shocking, and when all your friends it's now the second semester of your second year of business school, and everybody else has their jobs and they've already figured out what they're going to do, to be there really starting from square one, having to rethink everything. That was rough. That
is. So you shift gears. Yeah. You end up getting a job out of business school. You dust yourself off and you keep going with your life. What has happened in the years since? Do you regret what happened? Do you wish that you had gone into the CIA, or are you happy with where life has netted out?
Super happy with how life has netted out. But what, interesting postscript, I think, to the story is that I ultimately found out about 10 years later what it was that had kept me out during this background check. And it's wild. It was effectively came down to a clerical error. It was, I had taken EKG, which is a heart exam, and the pattern of my EKG showed a little bit uncommon pattern. Nothing wrong with it, just a slightly uncommon pattern. They had asked me to go get it checked out by a local cardiologist, which I did. Letter written back in from that cardiologist, totally fine, nothing wrong with my heart. Brian just has a slightly different pattern than the average. And I ultimately learned that piece of paper got put in the wrong pile, effectively, and it never got put in the cleared pile. And so even though my heart was fine, it was perceived that I had some heart issue, which ultimately kept me out of the CIA. So, the finding out that it was ultimately an error like that, I didn't know how to interpret that. I think part of it makes me feel like it was just fate, and the right decision was for me to have not joined and not been in the CIA. And, from a personal and life story, it was only a couple months after this all went down that I met my wife randomly in a bar in Boston. And we hit it off, and we moved to San Francisco a few weeks later. We got married. A couple years later, we have a son. We're back here, and all is good and happy. So, I now know the path that I took, and I am so happy with that path that I took. And it's, hard to know, well, what would it have been like had I actually gone down that other path? I have some insight into it from people I've experienced in my life who are in that world. So I've had a bit of a taste of it, but no regrets at all at the end of the day that it didn't work out. I'm super happy with the path I've taken.
And you should be. So I think that is a great way to end today's segment, and just really thinking about sometimes detours are really the fast path to your right destination. So as we end today, can you let everyone know if they're interested in being a non-vegan vegan or a true vegan? How could they get in touch with Purple Carrot and try your food boxes, which are great? I have tried myself.
Thank you. Just purplecarrot.com. That's our website. And you can check it out, and hopefully you like it. And I'd love to hear any direct feedback that anybody listening to this podcast has. You can shoot me an email directly if you have feedback, because I'd love to hear it. Brian@purplecarrot.com.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your knowledge of successful startup tips, of how everybody has setbacks in their career, and how that hiring mentality of an athlete really has helped you grow businesses. So thank you for your time. Happy Labor Day weekend. And thanks, everybody. We will be back here next Friday for another business conversation. Take care.
Thanks, Karen. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Momentum Magnet. We're here every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time to share inspiring comeback stories. We want to hear your reviews and love getting your subscriptions on iTunes and Spotify. For show notes and past episodes, visit momentummagnet.com. I'm Karen Morales, keynote speaker, writer, and founder and CEO of Marketing Magnet, a fast-growing marketing agency for purpose-driven companies. Whether you are a business needing an agency or if you are looking for weekly tips to get ahead, sign up at marketing-magnet.com to receive our weekly inspiration on getting more in your life and business.